I'm Rusty Tanton with my co-manager host, Bresden O'Malley, and this is the One-on-One Podcast, a podcast for software engineers. Joining us today is Michael Edvalson, former vice president of engineering at Loyal Health. We know him very well because he hired both Bresden and I at Loyal, and he was just a fantastic mentor to both of us. We missed him terribly for the past year, but we're also very excited to talk to him today. How you doing, Michael?
Man, I'm so fantastic. It is such an honor to be here. I've looked forward to joining ever since you extended out the opportunity. So thanks for having me on. It's mostly fun just to see you both again. So thank you.
Well, this podcast is just an excuse for us to talk to people that, that have been a part of our lives, that have been, that we've crossed paths with along the way. And I don't know, these conversations are just so nice, and we're excited to have you. So it's your one-on-one. What would you like to talk about today?
Well, I had a lot of thoughts about this. One of the things that has sort of intrigued me is, in my experience in the software space, is people wanting to have more influence in a whether it's a company or a team. And so I thought we just might talk a little bit about, how does a person who wants to be more involved, more influence about the direction of things or decisions that are made, how can someone do that, especially if the company is not set up to extend that to them directly or easily? So, I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, sounds great.
I love the topic. I think it's great. I've always been kind of a sucker for that, wanting to be more involved, sucked into the cool new things that the company wants to start. I've always really enjoyed doing that, and I'm excited for this conversation.
You want to talk about, first of all, managing up and just enabling the flow of information up and out? Why don't we talk through that a little bit first?
Yeah. This term of managing up, I think it's a term that, a lot of people are familiar with. I first came across it quite a few years ago when I read the book, Extreme Ownership. Perhaps you are familiar with that book. I think it's Jocko Willink and Leif Babin that wrote that book together. So we are very familiar with the idea of managing down, right? You got managers of managers, and their job is to manage down. And it's an important responsibility. We don't often think about the opportunity to manage up, though. And so, again, in the frame of trying to figure out how we can create a space where we can be more involved and influence the direction and influence decisions, one of the aspects or one of the opportunities there is to help manage up the company. And so, what does it mean to manage up? So, I'll throw a few things out. I'd love to hear some ideas that you guys have when you hear the term managing up. But this is really about helping our manager, maybe our manager's manager, helping us inform. The flow of information is a really key point. And from a management perspective, I feel like a really good manager, one of their primary responsibilities is to enable the flow of information, because information is how decisions are made. And so enabling good information distribution to the right places is key to being able to enable people to make decisions. Flip that around, though, and if I am an engineer on a team and I want to help influence what's happening, one of the ways to do that is to make sure that people around me, not just my manager, but people that are tangential or maybe diagonal to me in the organization, they are getting a really good view as I see it from where I'm at.
So what I will say, being kind of a new manager in the space, is I always wanted to know what it meant, because There are times when I felt like the information wasn't flowing. So if I told my manager and then that manager was not keeping the flow higher, I would want to go and do kind of a skip level and go speak to that director or and explain, what I felt. So I always felt that I was fortunate enough to work in companies where that was okay and that was encouraged. But I have dealt one time where I did that and it greatly upset my manager because they felt like they then kind of got hit from the side by some information that they didn't know or they just hadn't heard me however they felt, and it was I felt really guilty about it. So one of the problems I found with managing up was like, what did I do wrong there? Right.
Mm,
And how do you navigate really needing that information to flow without hurting anyone?
mhm. Uh, what do you think your manager was defending?
Well, I personally think he was defending the fact that he did not flow that information
Ah,
in an
yeah,
upward direction.
yeah, yeah. So, I mean, one of the things I have found and realized through, I mean, I've made so many mistakes, and I'm in some ways I'm interested. People who I've worked with in the past and who watch this be like, he doesn't believe that stuff. He didn't do that stuff when it has definitely been an evolution and a journey for me. But one of the things I have learned is in almost every case, when we try to push, we're going to trigger people,
Mm,
and it's always going to happen. And for a long time, I've had this feeling like, well, maybe I can predict what those triggers are going to be, and then I can present it in a way that softens it or that comes across less threatening or something like that. And I think that's okay for sure. But sort of the next evolution of my journey here is to realize that you can sort of try to predict, but in general, you actually can't, and it's um, you can spend a lot of energy trying to predict how people will respond to things. So, what I have just come to realize is that um, people are triggered not because there's anything wrong, but people are triggered because they have a loyalty to something. They have something that they want to defend or protect. And it could be a process, it could be themselves, it could be a job, it could be their baby software application that they made. Somebody that you guys have never seen that before, have you? Or yeah,
It's a
but
laugh of
yeah. So
recognition. Yeah.
but so yeah, there's that desire to defend, and we all do it. We all have a loyalty to things. So triggers are that, we're perceived as potentially threatening against a trigger, and so somebody will sort of react in a way to try to protect that, and that's kind of how the trigger is manifested. So I have learned that a real skill is to be able to see the trigger, not necessarily predict that it will happen, but see the trigger, be able to think of it in terms of not personalize it, but think of it in terms of what is this person defending? What is it? What loyalty is behind that? And be able to work through that with them, and that way, you know, um, eh, you can start the process of making progress without going to battle. So,
mm,
anyways,
yeah, I think that's great. No, it makes a lot of sense.
yeah. So, I mean, going back though a little bit, yeah, it is challenging when you have a manager that's potentially retaining information, not sharing it, something like that. Um, But in general, one of the ways that I have found to encourage or promote that information is actually to include more people on it. And it's not so much a matter of not trusting, a manager. Like we wouldn't really want to. I mean, we don't really want to, think of it that way. I think what we really want to think about it is there are a lot of people that are interested to know.
Mm-hmm.
Our manager wants to know. The manager's siblings in the organization or peers, if you want to say that, or whatever, our diagonal people, our people above us, the people around us, maybe some of maybe boss's boss. People want to know, and so sometimes it's about mass distribution of information that can help make sure the message is getting out. And I have found that that's a really great way to rock the boat a little bit. And sometimes, rocking the boat is what's needed. We can get to this a little bit later, but part of managing up is showing what the situation is like on the ground. And I think some of the challenges in that we sometimes face is that when things are really tough, when we want to raise that up, sometimes it's uncomfortable, and sometimes we get a response. Sometimes we get I don't want to hear about it. Just do the work, or something like that. And so, sometimes one of the best ways of communicating things like decisions that you're making, or especially if it's controversial, like, you've got 10 things that different people across the organization are asking your team to do. And everybody thinks they own you, right? And everybody's the priority. And, and your boss says in one day, like, well, I'm getting hammered by, this person, so this is your priority. And then the next day, somebody else pulls the fire alarm, and now the priority switches. And so, and you're just getting yanked around. You haven't experienced that either, right?
No, not today even.
No, my recognition laugh was, I'm thinking of all the messages that I sent to you that were like, where I was one of the 10, and it was like, okay, there's a baby bird over here. And it's like, to me, it's like a very important thing, right? Like it's, this is existential to me because it's about my software. It's about my little corner of the world. But like, there's 9 other teams who think exactly the same thing. And so little recognition there.
So, when one of the best ways of resolving a situation like that, now I'm talking about, you might be an individual, engineer, and that's happening to you. Maybe you're on a team, or maybe you're a frontline manager and that's happening to you. One of the best ways of kind of exposing that is to manage up, to communicate up the organization and out, and explain. Let me say this in a certain way, because we don't want to complain about it. We don't want to send a complaining email like, "Oh, we're getting hammered," right? But what we can do is we can first ask for guidance from our manager. When that, maybe we don't get that, or maybe it changes every day. But what we can do is we can fill in the gaps of decisions that are maybe not being made, that maybe aren't ours to make, but nobody's making them. So we make decisions about priority, and then we can clearly articulate what that priority is, and we can publish it out. And then what that does is it makes the organization look at it, and they can see that you have made a decision based on the best information that you have. And then if somebody has a question about it, well, now they have to work it out, because it's in the open.
Yep.
Many people see it. So that's one example of communicating up, is not complaining about what's going on, but just showing people, here's what's going on, here's what we're doing about it. And if you want to give us some guidance, that's fine. Otherwise, this is what we're doing. And I found that to be quite successful, except for that it does sometimes,
Mhm. Mhm.
it does light some fire sometimes, but
Also, I
yeah.
like this example a lot because this happened today for me, and I made this realization because I finally and I will say from this empathetic view, we are going through a lot. And so my manager is extremely busy. So I understand that when I'm asking him a question, it might not be a priority to answer that question. But I had to put this update out. I put out this update and he's pinging me and he's like, "Oh my God, that's not what we're doing at all. I'm sorry, this information didn't get to you, etc." And I was like, "Oh, okay, no problem." And so I think and I did for half a second, I was like, "Oh, I was wrong." So I had that feeling of I got something wrong. And then I realized, no, this was a win because I got the information that I was lacking. And so I think that when you're doing that, you do have to be ready to rock that boat, but you're going to get what you actually need.
One of the things I love about that example, Bresden, is um, you actually recruited your boss to solve a problem for you.
Mhm.
And um, and you did it in a way that's not going to your boss saying, "I don't know what to do. Tell me what to do." Right? It's
Mhm.
it's here's the information I have. This is all I have, and I know it's inadequate. Like I know it's incomplete,
Yeah.
but that's all I can get. So I'm making a decision, and this is what we're doing. And all of a sudden, the problem that was your problem got moved to the right place, which is
Mhm.
now you're going to get the information and the guidance you need to help the company deliver the outcomes that they're looking for. That's a fantastic example. So I loved hearing that actually.
Yeah,
Yeah.
awesome.
No, that's fantastic.
Yeah. Um, Another angle to this is to use data. And
Mm.
when we talk about managing up, we talk about we want to communicate. It's really about communication. It's about communication about around decisions that you're making that as an individual or a team, status, progress, risks, the mitigations that you're trying to take to mitigate those risks. Um, all of these kinds of communications are really useful because just like you experienced in that example, you're giving managers and other people a window into what's going on in your life, and they can check it quickly to see does it align with what they with the direction that everybody else is going. And if so, they give you a big old thumbs up. Thanks for the update. Or if not, then they'll give you some information that'll help correct your direction. Um, so I really love that. Of course, concise, easy to understand. Think about the audience. The audience really matters. What do they care about? What do they know? What's the language that they use? How are they going to understand this? Not everybody is, one communication message is not for everybody, right? So really trying to understand your audience. This is a great product management type of question or reminder. You are not your user. You, um, your users are not the same as you, and so what do they need to hear? So, and then coming back to data. So I was going to kind of mention data a little bit, and anytime someone says, use data, there are a couple of different responses that people have. A lot of it nowadays is like, yeah, use data. Like everyone uses data, right? But I want to address data real quick because I want to explain, or from my perspective, um, why data matters and why it actually is a differentiator. So can we talk about that for just a little bit?
Let's
Is
do
that
it.
Yeah,
okay?
I think this is a really hot topic today too, so I'm really excited. Let's
Okay.
do it.
Okay. So there are three main elements, and from my perspective, about why using data to communicate is so effective. The first one is I'm going to use a term that I mean, these are kind of invented. So like, I don't know, there's probably not, there's, uh, anyway, we're going for it. So for one thing, data is emotionless. it's not unbiased. There's definitely bias in data, but and data can't scream at you through a microphone, or it can't get worked up. It can't be perceived as irrational. And so one of the benefits of data is that when it's delivered, it doesn't matter if you yell at it. It doesn't matter if you don't like it. It doesn't, it's just there for someone to consume in a very plain, flat format. So it takes a lot of that out of decision making and out of communication, and so it's very so that's one element, one reason why I think using data helps communicate a situation. A second way is that data can be consumed in different ways, and it can be transferred. So when you share data to your manager can then share it, pass it along. When it's just a conversation, sure, they can try to interpret what you said, repackage that, and then pass that along. But we know how the telephone game works. And sometimes the fidelity of the message is lost. Sometimes it's reformatted, and pretty soon, it goes through 4 or 5 people, and it comes back to you, and somebody says, "Oh, so what you're really asking for is this," and you're like, "Whoa, that's not what I was asking for," But when you pass a chart, or when you pass some data, that can be passed along with the same level of fidelity that you gave it. So it can be easy to consume because it can be a chart. It can be it can be formatted in different ways to make it super easy, super visual. It's easy to transfer, and it can be interrogated so that if somebody says, "How did you get that data? Where did you get the data?" Instead of saying, "Well, that's just my opinion," or "This is just what I'm experiencing on the ground," you can say "No, it's right here. Here's the spreadsheet. You can go look at what you want to look at." So that's the second reason why I think data can be so effective. And actually, the third one is a completely psychological one that I have found to be really true. And when I landed on this, it kind of blew my mind. So the third one is that it's precise. Even if it's not accurate, it's still precise. So let me give you an example of this. So I'm gonna put the good example. If somebody says, actually, I'll ask you guys. I'll ask you both. So have you ever been in a situation where you felt like you were getting hammered with a lot of work, and somebody says, a boss, manager asks you a question about how overworked are you, or how, if we ask you to do this project, what's that going to do to your team? And all you could do is say something like, "We're hammered. We are hammered. We are full right now. We can't take this on."
I'll answer first. So yes, and many times, in fact, but usually what that situation is it's a prompt that tells me you need to have data ready for the next time you have to ask this question, or next time you have to answer this question.
Right.
And frequently that's how I've responded to it. It's like, well, I promise you I will have some actual information to show you next time. Just please take my word for it this time that we're hammered. So at Loyal, that was one of the things that prompted me to make this gigantic spreadsheet that was tracking. It was like sort of pseudo Dora metrics. I had everything from end to end on how long it was taking each developer, all of this stuff. But to your point, data can be precise without necessarily being accurate. We know that a developer might have closed, 10 story points last sprint, but what does that really mean? That doesn't really mean anything. And, because it's all a relative measurement, all you can really do with it is you have to sort of give this disclaimer with it of well, here's how you interpret this data. It's not like a weight or something like that, where it's an objective truth. It's still not objective, but it's at least precise.
Yeah, and I love that example. What you described there, the precision has an interesting effect on our minds. So think about a person who says our team is overworked. There's like zero precision in there. It's just a statement
Yeah.
about much, right? But now what if you said something like, we're going to go, it'll take us X number of days longer or X% longer to say something. Maybe a better example, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, a better example would be if someone is going to, let's get out of the software space for a little bit. Let's say someone's selling you a motorcycle, okay? And you say, and this is just an average run-of-the-mill motorcycle, and someone says, how much does the motorcycle cost? And somebody says a lot. Do you really know how much the motorcycle costs? No, you don't. If somebody says it costs $5,000, is that believable? It's more believable because it's like it gives you a frame. But since it's $5,000, a nice round number, you don't really know how much it costs. You know it doesn't cost exactly $5,000. You know it costs something else. But if somebody says it costs $4,987.73 after tax, now do you know how much it costs? You don't have any idea if that's accurate, but it's precise, and so you believe it.
I'm nodding because I'm like, yeah, we know how much a motorcycle costs now.
Yeah. Now we know how much that motorcycle costs. So so the data allows you to be precise. So to your point, story points, is that a great way to measure capacity for a team? And we all know that there's flexibility in story points. A 5-point story doesn't exactly always take the same amount of time, or it's a complexity score, right? So there's variability in there. So it's like it feels kind of yucky sometimes to somebody who wants to be accurate and precise to try to generate a report where you're trying to communicate something where the data is not perfect. And sometimes we felt that like, oh, this is not exactly right, so I don't feel good about standing behind it. But that's not the point. The point is directionally accurate is usually all that's required. It doesn't have to be exactly accurate, because what you're trying to do is tell a story. Now, definitely, we're not trying to lie. We're not trying to invent data. We're not trying to, there are ways to lie with statistics. We're not trying to do that, right? We're not trying to do that. What we're trying to do is we're trying to help people understand the story that's happening. So you can do that with data, even in a way that's not 100% accurate, but if it's directionally accurate, it can still tell the story. And the best part about that too is you can address the parts that are inaccurate. You can say, this is the way we measured it. It's not perfect, but it indicates what's happening here. And does it really matter whether we're off by 1% or 2% or something like that? It doesn't really matter. The story is the same. But if you come to somebody and you say, we are swamped on our team, or you come to somebody with a chart that says 37.5% of our team's efforts are being, spent chasing down answers that we can't get, and if we had somebody that could help us get those answers, we could unlock 30%. What did I say? Here I am lying with statistics. So 37.5% of our team could be unlocked if we could get somebody that would help us answer those questions. Mm-hmm. And immediately, it's data that people can latch onto and say, it doesn't matter if it's really accurate, it's directionally accurate and it's precise. And so it's data. And so, anyways, I don't want to belabor this point, but one of the reasons why data really helps is, I think, those 3 reasons. So,
yeah, that's great.
That actually makes a lot of sense. Also, Rusty, to your point where you're saying, well, now I know I need data after I've brought this to your attention and I'm not able to answer with anything better than, no, I'm swamped, I'm going to quit today if you give me this. Like, you to have that data on hand is very powerful. Yeah. I've been through a situation where one of my reports kind of a very difficult report. And when he finally left the company, he actually gave like a really horrible exit interview about me and like my manager, etc. And so when HR came and spoke with me, which I was totally blindsided by all of this, she was like, "Oh well, this happened. Can you speak to this?" And I was like, "Actually, let me give you my file on him."
Mm,
And I had dates and I had every single thing that we had ever spoken about, and it was already there. So she had no reason to believe that I needed to go fabricate anything to protect myself and tell that story. I could just give the story. So having that data preemptively is like my big point to this. I
mhm.
think that that's a very powerful way to use data as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah,
But yeah, that's my only example that I can think of right now.
yeah, yeah. No, yeah. So data is helpful, and yeah, doesn't have to be 100% perfect. It just tells a story, and you can
Mhm.
really help communicate with it. So yeah.
Yeah, I actually learned a lot of that from Rusty. Rusty is so data driven,
Oh,
and
well,
I
thank you.
am
Yeah.
not. And I definitely took a lot of that from Rusty because he was able to tell stories much more quickly, and people listened much more quickly when he was presenting data versus 1,000 words that I could try and tell.
Mhm.
Well, thank you. Um, well, so what are some other ways that
Yeah.
engineers can influence? We've talked a lot about managing up. What else can they do?
Yeah. So another point is that we can show that we care about outcomes and that we can see the big
Mhm.
picture.
Mhm.
One of the big challenges, I think, that I have experienced personally. I mean, I'll fess up to it. Is we get sucked into the technology, and when somebody asks us to contribute to a decision, to make a decision, um, to provide a point of view or an opinion, it just becomes about us or about the technology or about our pet technology or about a particular thing that's hot right then. We should be doing this. Everyone else is doing this, something like that. And um, to what I have experienced being on the other side, where I am being asked to look at legal concerns, licensing issues, budgets, security issues, hosting, support issues. There's a whole range of um, of aspects that go into making a decision about the business. And so, one of the things you probably remember that we talked about this a lot is when it comes to making a decision, it's important that we think of decisions not as technology decisions, but as a business decision.
Mhm.
There are many aspects that have to be factored in, and so flip that around. If I'm an engineer on a team, one of the ways that I can begin to get to build trust and gain influence is to show that I can see outside of my own little box. That I can see, like, what are the other implications if we use this technology. How is that going to impact that team over there that I'm not directly associated with, but how does that impact them? Because my boss or my boss's boss cares about that, so I should care about that. So if I can think outside the box there, that helps me gain some credibility, because then I can be trusted that when I make a decision or make a reference or make an opinion about something, people know that I'm thinking about the big picture and not just my own little space. The other one that's related to that is to think about the outcomes that we're trying to accomplish. Um, Big fan. I think this is something we talked a lot about at Loyal too. Was to think far beyond the outputs. Think think less about the work we're doing, less about the outputs, and more about what's changing, what's really making a difference to whatever we're talking about. And if we can think about that, then again, it helps build credibility with us and trust. So um, I'll just mention one other thing about this. When we just got done talking about data. Where does data come from? Well, it comes from it comes from the board. It comes from whatever the work management tools that you're using. You extract data out of that to show what's going on to the rest of the organization. Garbage in, garbage out. So one of the ways that an engineer can demonstrate an ability to see the big picture and gain a level of trust that they are engaging at that higher level is to engage in activities that show you are helping the team or the company accomplish the objectives. As an example, I'm kind of connecting the work management tools that you have with data. If I'm an engineer and my manager is saying, we really want our data to be accurate as much as possible because we're going to use this to extrapolate different things. We're going to try to come up with, see how our work distribution is across the team and figure out what, how we're distributed, how much time we spend in these different activities, different things like that. If we as an engineer can support that and say, okay, well, I'm going to commit to keeping my work updated as you're asking me to, even though everybody hates it. There's nobody that likes to do that.
Nobody does.
So I shouldn't say nobody. There's probably like 3 people out there that say that they like to do that. But I mean, it's just not a fun thing to do. The housekeeping type work is not the fun kind of work to do. I'm just speaking for myself. I don't like to do it. I'll say it that way. That way, if somebody out there says it, so
I've never met anybody who likes to do it.
Okay. So yeah. So if somebody, if people don't like to do it, but I can see the big picture and I can see that the manager is painting this vision for me to say, if we use the tool correctly, then we can understand correctly what's happening and we can use that to communicate up. We can use that to make better decisions. We can use that to redistribute our capacity or whatever we're going to do. And if I, as an engineer, can say, you know what, I don't like it. I don't like doing it. Not my favorite thing, but I see the vision. I'm going to participate and contribute. Then that shows that I'm thinking about the bigger picture and I'm wanting to sort of help deliver the outcomes. So again, that helps establish credibility and trust that I'm a team player, that I'm helping us move forward. So anyway, I think that's a really key way that people can become part of the conversation, become part of decision making that's happening. And also, when somebody says, "How can we improve this process?" if they know that you're bought into the outcome and that you have been trying to help deliver that outcome, then when you have an idea that helps the team push in that direction, then you'll have an audience to hear your idea.
Yeah. So I think of it like back when I had hair, right? Like I clearly don't have hair now. I used to hate the process of getting a haircut. I felt socially awkward when I sat there with the person cutting my hair. It's like, I don't really want to talk. I'm introverted. Can we just quietly sit here and do this? I used to hate the process of it, but I love the result, right? And so I convinced myself to go get a haircut every 6 weeks, despite the fact that I hated the process of doing it. And so that's one way I would try to relate it to people when I was trying to convince them to keep their tickets up to date, to do a good job with scoping, to do all these things we need to do to get our data sane and clean, because we're not going to get the results we want if we don't do these things that are a little bit unpleasant sometimes.
So Rusty, when you had an engineer that after you painted that vision for what you wanted to do with the data, and then you had an engineer that you did not have to harass over and over and over, what did that do for you? And in terms of your perspective of how that engineer was on board and how you might engage with that engineer. So how did that happen for you?
Well, it just saves time. So one of the things is they started to get into the updates that I would give out, and that didn't have, they actually were engaged with it. They would start looking at, and I'm not thinking of one specific person. I'm thinking of actually 3 or 4 people as kind of an amalgam, because because I kind of talked to everybody at the same time when I was doing this. But I saw them as they bought into it just a little bit. They started keeping their tickets up to date, and I could show them where the data was getting better because they were doing that. And then so like once I was able to do that, then it sort of created a feedback loop where they actually started doing even more to keep the data up to date because they saw that I was using it. And so like, but it, as an engineering manager, I needed to paint value for them. They needed to see that there was something coming out of their efforts, something coming out of their work. And once they actually could see it demonstrated, then they were more willing to help.
That is one of my favorite, what's the word? That I love that story because it highlights to me a really important aspect of leadership, which is not about decision making, but about vision.
Yeah.
And as a frontline manager, you can create vision for your team. And that's what you did. And then it needed some convincing, which does happen, right?
Yeah.
But the best part about it is with some vision and then a healthy flow of information, what happens? People start making decisions that push the team in that direction that you didn't have to make.
Yeah.
You didn't have to make those decisions. They act on their own. They see where we're going. They are excited about helping the team get there. And now, rather than have the manager be the brainchild and everybody else just doing what the manager wants, now you've recruited all the brains on your team, and 5 brains better than 1 brain. So
100%.
right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that's a fantastic example of, in my opinion, of really great leadership.
Thank you.
Which is why we wanted you to join Loyal.
Oh, thanks. Well, yeah, I mean, I just want to say, like, so Bresden was in Atlanta last week, or was it last week, week before? I have no sense of time anymore.
Last week.
Anyway, I happened to, we were spending just a little bit of time talking to Cameron and having a little conversation, and we were just remarking about what a great culture Loyal had for a while, and just like I've never seen that many just A+ people in one place. Like it was just a really great place. And I mean, like you were such a huge part of that, of hiring a lot of great people there. And this podcast came out of the relationships at Loyal. Like there's so many good things that came out of that place, even if it didn't like end up exactly where some of us wanted it to. So anyway, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, what are some other ways we can influence as engineers? Yeah.
I think a really great way that I learned early on, and it's pretty simple, but I once had a fantastic boss who painted this picture for me, who helped me understand that demonstrating competence in your job, in the responsibilities of your job, and flexibility in how you do those is a great way to build trust with people around you, and a great way to be invited into the conversation. I'm not talking about being the know-it-all. I'm not talking about having all the answers. I'm talking a lot about being able to demonstrate a breadth of experience and different ways of looking at a problem, and different ways of viewing the problem, having different perspectives, and not adhering to one way of thinking. Not having a specific dogmatic approach to everything, not always following the same philosophy, not always advocating for the same tool, the same technology, the same, whatever, but being willing to take a step back, showing that your experience can be applied in different ways. And I have found, my experiences when I have been able to engage with an engineer who is actually less willing to say that they know the answer and more willing to say, well, let's think about it. I can think about it this way. I can think about it this way. I can think about it this way. And if I look at it all these different ways, here's what I see. That is a way better conversation to have than somebody who answers your question before you even finish asking the question, because they have a ready answer with the thing that that they're going to say. You know what I mean? So I think that's a great way to build trust and to gain influence with people around you. Yeah. There is a corresponding side to this, which is around decision making. One of the important things that a company needs to do is to clarify how decisions are made within the company. Who gets to make what decisions? What are the decision models that we typically follow? There are, I have defined 4 that I kind of separate out. There's 4 different kinds of decision making models that are used for different reasons, but knowing how decisions are made are really important for everybody for a lot of reasons. Now, I'm flipping that around because your question about getting on board is a really important aspect, because what we want is that I shouldn't say what we want. What we often encourage, or certain decision-making models, what we encourage is for people to contribute their perspectives, their ideas, their insights, their experience into a decision, into a kind of a decision, a pre-decision model, right? Where we want data, we want to put it on the table. We want to take that table, we want to spin it around. We want everybody to put what they see on that table. And that table, the data that people put on there is not going to align. People's perspectives will disagree they'll have experiences that disagree with somebody's experiences over here. And so what we want is to see that as clearly as possible. And then, depending on the decision-making model, somebody is going to make a decision, and it has to be done, right? There has to be decisions to move forward. So whenever a decision is made, all of those people who put data on the table, we want them to recognize a couple things. First of all, we want them to recognize that they had a chance to influence. Not that it was a competition, but that they were part of the process. And a corollary to that is we want them to know that their perspectives and their thoughts were heard and seen, that it was taken into consideration. And then when a decision is made, those people can say, I was part of this process. This is not what I recommended, but I was part of the larger process and I was heard, and therefore I can get on board and we can move forward. Or there's a couple of angles to this, because it's really hard to get on board to a decision if you feel like you have special insight that was not considered, right? That's one of the big problems that I feel sometimes is a decision's made. I feel like I have information that other people don't have. And when I'm like, hey, I think you guys should know this, and people aren't listening to me. And so then it's hard for me because then I'm like, hey, but, blah, so it's, so that can block us. The other thing that we can do, though, and I think this is really important when it comes to decision-making and getting on board, is if we struggle getting on board with the decision, one of the things that we can do is ask some additional questions that help everyone else think about how are we going to know if this got us where we wanted to go. So just as an example, say a decision is made about something. I don't agree with it because my data over here puts me in a strong position over here. The opposite decision is made. I can say, without disrupting too much, I can say, okay, I'm going to get on board. I had my chance, and this is how it works. Your decision, the decision is yours to make. Therefore, you make the decision, and I will get on board. And I'm going to ask the question: how are we going to measure success? How are we going to know if this decision ends up delivering what we're expecting? And that can help assuage me about my concerns, because obviously, if I don't agree with the decision, it's coming from a place where I feel like it's not going to get us there, or it's not going to get us there as efficient or as effectively. So then I can ask the question: how will we know? How are we going to know? I'll just want to say one more thing about that, which is a decision is an experiment. I've come to frame decisions in a specific light. A decision is an experiment, and a decision not only is an experiment, but it's an experiment on an assumption that we will yield a certain outcome with these set of trade-offs. It's a long way to describe it, but basically it's like a decision is you have all these options. You're going to prioritize certain options because you value certain ones over, you value them differently. And so you're trading off. I'm choosing this, I'm not choosing that. And by doing this, I'm going to yield this outcome. Like that is what a decision is. And so because a decision is an experiment, I think a lot of times what ends up happening is we do the decision. When we think about an experiment, we don't end the experiment with the action. The experiment ends with the collecting of the data and the results, and then publishing that back for learning. That's when we sort of end an experiment. But with decision making, we sometimes forget that last step. We forget, like we make the decision, like we do all this work to prep, we make the decision, we figure out how to execute on it, we execute on the decision. What do we not do often? How do we collect data if that was a good decision? Like, how do we know if our experiment was correct? How do we know if the assumption proved out? And not only how do we know, but how are we going to publish that so that everybody can learn from it? And so asking those kinds of questions can help us feel a lot more comfortable about getting on board with the decision that we may not agree with. Now, circling back about why it's useful to get on board is because it shows that there's a time and a place, and the company values my input. And at the same time, when it's time to move forward, I can shift gears and I can move forward to advance the team to the outcome that we want. And I have found in my experience, it is super valuable when I have an experienced engineer who will discuss with me, who will show me where I'm wrong, who tells me strong opinions, and allows me to push back on them to say, why do you think this way? And there's a really strong debate. And then after we've been able to work it all out and we can at least see each other, then we make sure that we know whose decision it is, right? So it may be my decision, it might be their decision, but as long as we know whose decision it is, then we can all pause and we can say, okay, we did the work, make the decision.
Yeah.
And once that decision is made, then that engineer can get on board and say, okay, let's all move forward and let's figure it out. That is so powerful. And I'll fight to have that engineer on my team all the time. So yeah.
Awesome.
So Michael, just one more question I wanted to ask. And what is probably the largest piece of advice that you'd give someone who's kind of on that track of becoming an influencer? What would you love to tell them and give them a little bit of advice?
I learned that when we blame or complain about a circumstance or a situation, we disempower ourselves. Because what we're doing is we are casting on other people the responsibility for change. We're saying it's that person's fault, or it's this system's fault, or it's the company's fault. And what we're doing to ourselves is saying, I can't do anything. I don't have the ability to change. I don't have the ability to influence. I don't have the ability to impact. And so that feeling of powerlessness is super demoralizing, discouraging. We disengage, we back away. So teeing that up, a piece of advice that I might share is, anytime you feel like there's something happening at your place of work, I mean, anywhere in your life, if there is something coming to your mind where you want to blame somebody or you want to just complain about it. And I'm not talking about venting, right? I'm not talking about going to the water cooler and being like, I'm talking about like really like putting blame on somebody else, or saying something else is the cause. I would recommend, take a moment and ask yourself, what is it actually, like what part of this is your responsibility?
Mm.
Maybe even, for example, actually this goes back to some of the other stuff we talked about earlier, but maybe ask yourself, if you are the entire whole problem, what would you do to fix this? Like, what can you do, assuming that you are empowered, you are the person that's going to affect change. How are you going to affect change? And that comes across really hard because, no, it's my boss and my boss's boss, and I can't tell the CEO what to do, and I can't, that's all true. But that's not the point, because when we think about it in those terms, we're thinking about it very narrowly and very like up the chain of command. We're not thinking about it from an influence perspective. We're not thinking about it from an informal authority perspective where we can gain trust with people. We can build influence by doing all the things that we talked about today. And we can affect change from any place within the company. So that's my piece of advice. If somebody wants to listen to it, is to not blame, and instead say, you know what, let's just pretend that I'm the problem. And if I'm the problem, what can I do? So
awesome.
That's an amazing piece of advice. I really, really appreciated that. Thank you, Michael.
It's so good to be here with you both.
No, and that we were just so glad that you're here, and it's been so great talking to you. And I guess my last question is just, do you have any final thoughts you want to impart?
Yeah, I do. I guess people can influence. I have had enough experience at different places within a company. I've worked as an engineer. I've worked as a business owner. I've worked as an executive, and I've worked all in all the positions in between. And I would just say that influence and authority, well, I should say influence. Influence does not necessarily come with a title. It doesn't, just because you have a title doesn't mean that you're going to be able to influence or make change or bring about outcomes. It's not the title that does it.
This is a really important subject. I've always worked really hard to be this at a company, so I really appreciated this, and I've learned a lot just in this hour of talking with you. So thank you so much, Michael, for joining us, and it's so wonderful just to see your face and hear your words of wisdom again. This was great. Thank you so much.
No, it's my pleasure. It's nice to see you both.
Great to see you. Thanks so much, Michael. Opinions expressed on the one-on-one belong only to us and our guests, not to any of our respective employers. Does this platform call to you? Do you need a one-on-one? You can find us on the web at theoneonone.show. That's THE1ON1.show, where you can sign up to be a guest. We also love listener messages. You can email us at contact@theoneonone.show or leave us a voicemail at speakpipe.com/theoneononepodcast. Send us your comments and questions, and we may respond to your message in a future episode. You can also find us in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, and YouTube by searching for The One-on-One. Please rate and review us on those services. It helps us out a lot. The One-on-One wouldn't be possible without listeners like you and a fantastic community of people who help us in ways large and small. Special thanks to Cameron Cooper, who helps us with marketing, Michael Ducharme, who created our bumper music, and Elena Sage, who's been a huge booster since day one. Thanks for listening.